Hello, welcome back to the value of everything. Now, we are going to a place of ideals, which we can only envisage in our dreams, which is not attainable in any way, shape, or form, but I'm going to just throw in some ideas here. Now, potentially, we could say in a few years' time, maybe in 20 years' time, where we can create virtual reality, where we can connect into our central nervous system like the Matrix can, we potentially can create Utopia. But I have mentioned before in previous podcasts that if we do not have certain levels of pain, certain levels of hardships and struggles in day-to-day reality, there may be a certain element of people not even bothering and really just get into a state where the progression of man just goes into this static state where everyone is in a world of instant gratification. So Utopia is really a tricky thing of ideals which we can get to, but we really need a little slice of hard work involved in this world of Utopia. We cannot really get to this beautiful state of endless pleasure and joy by doing nothing at all. Or it really wouldn't be a Utopia, it would just be this little porn site that you go to. So, what is a utopian place? So a utopia is, just quickly from just reading up on definitions, is a place which is an ideal society where people go, right, this is where our dreamland could be, this is the place where citizens can be free in a world where they can be endless pleasure and prosperity and freedom. So all of those beautiful, wonderful things. Now, out of interest, I have decided to do Utopia before Dystopia. I can't even say the word. So that we just get an idea of how human psyche works in comparison to the clicks and views of one to another. Now, if I maybe there's just a little bit of an issue here with terms of how good one is compared to the other, but I'll try and make them fairly equal in the study. But this is just a thought experiment. I've done very little in terms of research beyond just plucking out ideas from the top of my head right now, but I will continue on with further ideas and research as time progresses, which may be quite useful. I will theorize. I'll just throw out loads of theories as I go along on Utopia, but I'm just going to state like a potential progression of how we reach and get accustomed to Utopia, how it is possible, and how we may be able to get to a state of potential bliss. This podcast may be kind of a little bit of an enlightenment of where humankind could reach to and has the potential to get to if we really have to get around a few little hardships before we get there. Well, maybe quite big hardships, but there's a giant cliff that we need to climb over, and then we may find ourselves in a very nice pastures. So how would we get... So we've sort of defined the utopia of this ideal society. I've just quickly run in there with just like, hold on a minute here, we can't just live in heaven, or we're just in this perpetual state of continuous pleasure. So I've ran in there with Socrates' theory of to scratch an itch permanently is the idea of permanent pleasure. It's not really the case. There needs to be the work ethic, the drive, the day-to-day grind to get to the task. And then once the task is accomplished, that you rejoice, and then we move on to the next task. So that is really the world of certain ideals that potentially could be created. Sounds like a lot of hard work, but I predict that it could become very, very pleasurable, and it will give us an intense amount of free time as well to actually do the things, explorations and ideas, and really be creative as much as we possibly can. So what we've got right now is we've got this little crossroads in terms of government powers and economic problems, and a lot of little crossroads which are just right around the corner. They're not even like just 20 years away or 30 years away. All this shit's going to blow up in our face not too far away. We've got one country. Let's just quickly iron out the economic situation. So you got China, which is the major factory workshop of the world. It claims that it's earning ridiculous amounts of exports, yet the world economy is shrinking and shrinking. So they're fudging up the figures, and then the central planning of China's state is getting involved in the stock market and pumping up the prices, even though everybody who's been margin trading has been just knocked out of the system. There's obviously some people that are left over, so they're just trying to keep the equity bubble, and the state of their economy is pretty dodgy. I mean, obviously they've got a fairly decent surplus. There are certain things which are working out all right for China, but they really want to get themselves to a state where they convert themselves into a westernized country, but they've got major problems in terms of their demographics. Their country's population is going down and really, if you're trying to increase the size of your economy, obviously they're trying to do it as an exporter, but really one of the major ways of doing that is to increase the size of demand inside your own economy, and that obviously improves the amount of spending and GDP and expansion and speculative bubbles, which governments feed from. So they can't really do that because of the one-child policy, and that's really just pulling them back. On the other side of the sea, we've got America, who appear to be doing all right. I guess they've got sort of fairly some little trace of a free market, which is pumping out some good goods, especially in Silicon Valley. They're the ones that seem to be really doing them the most at the moment, but potentially it's because they have got the freest market there. And there is really problems in terms of the amount of QE spending which has been occurring. So the government has been purchasing its own debts into the future and devaluing its currency to a certain degree. With this purchasing of the debts, that's created a very cheap bond and lending rate, which has been filtering down to the investment grade banks. And the investment grade banks have been giving out this very cheap money or very low interest rate money to all these stock market companies. And these stock market companies are purchasing back their own share price, knowing that this would be very profitable to their companies. Now, they're purchasing back their share price, but they're not actually really cutting costs or improving the level of production and retooling their factories. So it's a little bit of a mirage as to how well the economy is improving there. There may be some improvements, and there's some production lines and some things which are improving in America, but in general, that's really the picture that's being painted. They haven't got. We're not sure about their gold reserves. That we don't know whether they've leaked out all their gold reserves. They they still claim to have the highest amount of gold reserves. If there was ever a hyperinflation scenario, America would have to tap into their gold reserves, and they haven't been able to deliver them back to Germany, and that's a bit of an issue. You could look at let's say other little Western countries like Canada and say Australia. Well, they're major exporting countries, and really they're getting whipped in terms of what's happening to China, because if you're exporting the raw materials, then the biggest industrial nation, the one that's producing all the goods, really hasn't got the demand, even though the statistics say otherwise. The government released statistics say otherwise. So that's looking bad. Then in Eurozone, you've got a lot of weirdness going on because you've got the central planning of the Eurozone, who is trying to organize a singular currency, even though different countries have got ridiculous amounts of debt to others, and Germany is really the flag holder of the one economy that seems to be producing and really has had the freer market in terms of all the other countries beforehand. But there is many countries which have accumulated a ridiculous amount of debt, and there's just so many. It's just a complete muddle in terms of how the economies are being run, and you can only foresee that there's going to be a bit of a breakdown in the Eurozone eventually at some point. Things are not quite rosy. They do, obviously, the Eurozone does produce some fairly nice goods, but particularly you're looking at Germany more so than anywhere else. So things are not really looking quite as they seem. I guess Africa does produce a little bits here and there, but it's not really much of a blip on the radar in terms of the world financial powers. So things are not looking that rosy, and all you need is the speculative bubble to no longer continue, so nobody can continually gain from this fat that is just being injected into the land of this equity pump up. So this pumping of money, this endless increase of the money supply and the debt supply into the markets, which create these ginormous asset bubbles. So we get massive blown up housing sectors and blown up stock prices and blown up commodity prices. But once the ability to continuously prop up all of these markets finish, then we have a problem with depreciation, and everything starts to swing back to a price discovery point of what is affordable. So yeah, as soon as we get to a state where governments cannot really swing down that currency down low enough, and then they find themselves into a position where they have I guess we're in a state of stagnation at the moment, but obviously the statistics report it otherwise. We're going to get ourselves to a point of deflation to a certain extent, and we're going to find that the economy is really just not kickstarting in any way, shape or form, and that stops people from spending more and more so, and then that trickles the economy down even further. And then really the printing presses start to go at that point, and eventually we get to a state of like maybe QE like times 1,000, QE times 1,000,000, and then really the people just start to go, oh my god, we're finding that the money supply has gone in so much that all asset values are just going up to the skyrocket, and particularly where it comes to maybe your food goods, which are getting ridiculously outpriced, and we're all becoming a little bit poorer and poorer and poorer in terms of how much we can afford. So yeah, this is like the state of play, and let's bring us back, because that's quite depressing, all of that stuff. But if we bring ourselves back in terms of what potentially could happen. Now, we have this little invention which has been miraculously invented, I think it may have come out a little bit after 2007 crisis, called Bitcoin, which means that there is a little model, a decentralized, non-manipulated model, which people can convert over to when the shit hits the fan and the economy starts to fail and the governments decide to hyperinflate the currency supply. Now, that's fairly interesting, and we potentially have this real conversion that could happen. Like overnight, we could say, okay, well, there ain't really much point in us owning these dollars anymore. Let's just use Bitcoin as it's a viable means of exchange. There's a little less turmoil and less hyperinflation. In fact, it's increasing in value quite rapidly in comparison to the dollars, and we shall just stick along with it. So that basically takes the ability of governments to have an incredible centralized power on assets, and it stops these oligarchies and these rich 1% to continuously cream off the endless speculative bubbles which are created, and brings a certain level of normality and exchanging of value. So as what happened in 2007 when the crisis hit, the very, very rich percent got smashed to smithereens, but then we put in power this massive adoption of QE, and the speculative bubble continued, and the rich 1% became very rich again. But if the savvy spenders and the ones that have been quite wise and prudent with their money and have not accumulated a ridiculous amount of debt put themselves into a fairly good position, they might choose to own Bitcoin, they may choose to own gold, they may choose to own land, which has means to produce resources. All of those little steadfast positions may give wealth and value to those people, and they choose to decide to start from scratch again. Now, when economies fail, especially when you look into the Roman Empire, you do have this decentralization of power. You get these people that own farmlands, and then they pay their little soldiers money, and they create their own little mini cities. But in terms of today's era, we may have a situation where people have this ability, these monies, they have the Bitcoin systems, and they can start acquiring assets. They can seem to be the most prudent, the most wise, the ones who are most virtuous, and they can almost rebuild society from scratch. And with the adoption of a lot of technology which is out there already, mobile applications, decentralizations, peer-to-peers, we have the ability to govern ourselves in security, so we would have all of those options to us. One of the biggest expenses of the world is the war on drugs, potentially the war on terror. They can be evaporated in terms of a government which is no longer a big target on the head of people, but now it's just decentralized people that are governing themselves. So you can see this little conversion over. There's and literally nobody's throwing any arms anywhere. Nobody's attacking anybody. It's just a absolute collapse of the global financial system, which makes people turn to these people that do have a certain amount of assets left over. So if the governments trash their currencies to smithereens, then the power just gets, and the value of things just get transferred to the people that have the assets. Now, there is obviously certain issues with that. Governments don't really like to relinquish their power overnight, and particularly where they have all their military forces and things like that, and their abilities to pass laws, and their abilities to say, well, if you are my military soldiers, I can really pay you in the future for doing this task for me, and maybe you can become the president as well, and all these different things. You can potentially have little stages of infighting and coups and military land grabs back, but essentially, if there is a lot of information which is pumped out there, and the people are understood that maybe this government doesn't really have the power anymore, they don't, maybe, okay, there's these military things and all this kind of stuff, but really the people that have got the money and the gold to pay me are these people, so why am I trying to fight them and things like that? And it really, you do have this interesting this conversion which potentially could happen. Now it's very hard, it's really complicated, because you've got ridiculous amounts of extremely high tech military power and everything else, but what we potentially could have is certain people which have got these assets, they come together, they pool around, and they say, look, we know that, let's say we're in America, for example, we know we've got a ridiculous amount of stealth bombers which have got nuclear bombs to them and stuff like that. Let's whip around and some people own these areas. Let's whip around and try to find a way to maybe still keep a certain few in use for people that may want to be put on a insurance scheme, and maybe let's just work out a way to dispose of these the rest of the bombs and get ourselves into a freer state. Interesting concepts. Now we've got the other thing, which is really the interesting thought. So obviously we had the money part of the Bitcoin, but we've got the blockchain. So where it comes to the law and civil order and ownership, we have a methodology of applying asset values to a ledger, and this is obviously a globally run ledger. It's like the Bitcoin ledger is probably about 50 or 60 gigabytes now of all the assets which are underpinned onto this global ledger, which everyone can be accountable to and also anonymous to. So once we potentially have some kind of conversion back down, now the government could say, okay, well, we want to try and keep in power to a certain extent. We've got certain bills to pay. We've got the elderly care. We've got welfare states and these things to pay off before we completely go down to a very tiny minicus state, or maybe even nothing at all. So there is the potential idea that we could, the government could say, okay, well, we need to really start to sell off land resources. Obviously, they try to sell off all the gold, and now the gold's depleted. Now we need to sell off the land, and the only way that there's a manageable way to sell off the land is via the Bitcoin. So they will say, okay, well, all the other currencies are pretty much trashed around the world. You might have one or two that still stick around, but really, the government, to stay in power, to really pay off whatever the debts were or anything else like that, the government will have to say, okay, well, we're going to have to sell Bitcoins, sell land and maybe military and all these things for Bitcoins. So people maybe just be purchasing certain military hardware and all these kind of things in terms of trying to acquire just ownership of general things. Now, I think it's a little bit scary, obviously, that these farm owners and these Bitcoin owners start to own a ridiculous amount of military hardware and stuff like that. But some of them are really not going to be interested in like creating warfare and fighting for Bitcoins, because Bitcoins are very hard to just obtain in an asset form in the first place. There's no way of them in penetrating the Bitcoin blockchain through the amount of cryptography which is out there. Everyone's trying to hack at it, but it's impossible to hack at. So even if they do have a number of tanks, he's really going to struggle hard to get to a point of trying to take over the rest of the townships and whatever land he wants to do. Maybe he's trying to set up his own little state where he's a dominant power. So the Bitcoin and the system of anonymity and ledger accounting has really thrown back a lot of these issues. So the Utopia is really coming into some kind of light. Now, obviously, people were having some severe problems. There's issues as to all this ridiculous amount of wealth reallocation. There's debts which are being transferred from one place to the other, and there's people that are trying to recover debts, and there's no means of which some people can actually ever pay off debts. So there's all this big transfer of debts which are really just going to have to get to a point of being written off because of the speculative bubble, which has continually risen. And then people are going to put themselves back into a mode and a mindset of being very prudent with their money, not being so speculative with their money, and really trying to get themselves to a state of buying things that really are value to them. And people are going to start training for things which are really of value to the outside world. I've made this observation as well, that where there is potentially this vacuum of the government, we may have this massive blossoming of a free market in terms of replacement measures of what the government can do. So you may have to have security services replacing the police force. You may have to have medical and insurance companies taking over from the public healthcare. You may need to have certain, again, a lot of insurance things which will kick in. You'd need to work around systems of the Bitcoin and escrow systems and third-party adjudication, where you do not have law systems and law courts. But there is this massive investment and a massive drive for people to convert straight over into working out services which the governance could not would not be able to provide at a time, for people to lay roads down, for building train lines down, all number of things which the vacuum of this of a power of a state is no longer able to do because of its hyperinflation of its currency, devaluing its currency to such an extent that it can no longer afford to run, and it's been just pulled down by its own debts. So, right, so I've just sort of tried to explain a very interesting scenario. I don't think really people can sort of envisage things this far ahead. And it seems to be, rather than right in a utopia, we seem to be in this state of ridiculous amounts of transfers of wealth, ridiculous amounts of transfers of mindsets, ridiculous amounts of potential hardships, and real sort of questions of the way that the world is run, the questions of the way that the world is managed. The questions of what is valuable to people and what is not valuable to people, hence why the podcast is The Value of Everything. It's just like an incredible shot to the head. And if you could think of the utopia that could create, of people going, my God, I've had a veil released from me, and I can see now really the state of which we have been under, and how life had been just following celebrity and gossip and sports, and really that was not the thing that was going on. There was a really massive thing that was hidden from humanity, and we wasn't really seen that way. And there were a few people, that potentially you who are listening to this podcast, that was aware of these things, and yet the whole masses were totally oblivious to this tidal wave of a change which was going to come round the corner. So it's very interesting how the human psyche could be pulled from this very dumbed down playing your games console, not really doing too much in your world, to being everything thrown around, to being really trying to find out who your friends are, finding out what skills you do have, what can you do for people, and really knowing that you've tried to be as measured and as good as you can in these situations to take humanity into the next level, I guess. Obviously that sounds like a bit like you're a superhero, but in some ways there will be superheroes created from the scenario that could be made. I mean, in some ways you would think, okay, I'd love the government to sort of continue to survive in some way, so it could protect the people, could protect everybody else. But there's so many interesting things which could occur in the conversion to a decentralized society. So yeah, these are interesting parts. Now, an interesting part as well that we noticed, that if we do become it into a decentralized world, it becomes an instant voluntarist world, unless you're living on somebody else's land and they're trying to oppress you, and then you have to go to another person's land. But I'm sure there's going to be lots of digitally signed pieces of land which everybody can get an access to via the blockchain. And it'll be interesting in terms of how that's mastered. Now, you may have also some people disputing how the blockchain seems to be taking over how everything has been licensed, and why should that have a monopoly of everything? Well, because it's decentralized in itself, that's probably had the best prudent way of doing things. So everything's being sold. Everybody owns every thing that can be seen. Everybody owns the seas which border this government state that has got into hyperinflation debt and can no longer afford, so it sells off all its land pieces, and it gets sold and converted onto the Bitcoin ledger. So everybody owns a certain segment of something, and people are willing to trade value for value. So people may choose to trade certain qualities of your IT knowledge to work within the blockchain to get ideas of how the governance could be converted into much more value for value transactions. Also, we have the advent of a very interesting part, which is potentially could create our utopia as well as dystopia, but we need to be very careful of this technology which is coming around the corner, which is AI technology. Now, this AI technology can give us special abilities. One of my podcasts that I recommend listening to is AI assisted artificial assisted intelligence, that really gives us some incredible benefits. I think we will be able to basically upgrade ourselves to a multi-processing, multi-memory bank idea, which can have operating system is the word that I use, but obviously it's the human operating system, and we will have infinite capacity to really push to a maximum ability to really push our brains to the max to create a world which is even better. So there's technologies. I don't really mean to say that technologies are going to save us from the despair of what we are. Really, the thing that constitutes us in our survival is the grasping of virtues and really being as good as we can be to really survive. Mastering virtues and then having abilities of these great technologies at the same time, so being virtuous and having heightened intelligence is really like the ideals which we can have that potentially could push us forward into a certain state of utopia. Now, we also, once we get to this state of utopia, we have the real world and the virtual reality world, which we can both emerge in. And as I said, and I keep on mentioning, this utopia that we're sort of gradually, I would say we're getting to this point now, that time is getting on. We seem to be very voluntarist. We seem to have a lot of brilliant ideas in the free market, which is replacing a lot of government services which were there in the past. Things are getting easier to use. Things are becoming very automated in terms of the way things are run, and things are becoming very cost effective. We are learning things which are really good and valued, rather than becoming not quite sure what's not very valuable at the moment. I guess, I don't know, being a makeup artist, I'm not really sure. I guess that's still going to be popular to a certain extent. So things are ticking on pretty well. We're really converting over. There's not these massive debts which are being piled on from one person to another. I guess there would be some kind of resource allocation. There'll be some kind of banking system which would be in place. However, and there'll be crowdfunding and things like that. But it would be based upon real true risk ratings and everything else. So there would be financial and investment grade markings that will be going on in the world. That will be an interesting aspect to be involved in. But there's this massive gulf and vacuum of where the government no longer exists. Obviously, people like to say where the government doesn't exist, then you're going to get all these people trying to uprise. But I would say you potentially have all this technology which hasn't uprisen yet, which has the potential to come back and really show us the free market in its full power. So yeah, so this utopian society is coming to fruition. People are doing value-to-value trades. There are people which are really there's not really much immorality which are occurring here. You really have to earn your own keep. You have to work. Nothing comes for free. So you're living in a world where just you don't just get given handouts for no reason at all. People are put into a place of work. Exploitation really cannot happen because you just have another place to go to. People are trying to compete for wages. People are trying to compete for workers. There is all these different varying degrees of abilities and everything else that occurs. People still, no matter how well the technology and the automation goes, we still require good human services and good human touches. The cost of living should rapidly reduce as we refine and improve the way that we can obtain energy and resources from the land. There is many ways that we are building and producing a utopian society which is in the basis of a capitalist free market world. So all interesting dynamics, but the problem with Utopia is that it could potentially become too good for too long. We may decide that, and this is one of the points that I do make, is that, and this is one of the concerns that I do make, is that we start to become a little less into the world of reality and go into the state of virtual reality, and we start to gradually go into that more so and more so, that really it doesn't come to a purpose to be in the real world. There is interesting elements which go in there. We can go from one dream state to another dream state to another dream state and get totally entangled inside the web of virtual reality. Hey, let's do a mindfuck on you right now. Let's just say you are in a dream of a dream of a dream, and this dream is only going to come open once this is finished with. This your life ends here, and then you can go to the next part of the virtual reality state. We've increased your mind so rapidly that for every day is like a split second. So literally it's taken no time for you to finish this life, and then it's you're on to the next part, which is a dream of a dream of a dream. Sorry to do that to you. But, obviously I need proof as a philosopher to actually let that one ride, and as there's no proof, I have the burden of proof, and I can't prove that as true, then there is no way or grounds of me proving that as true to you. It's only a hypothesis and a theory with no evidence. So yeah, sorry for that little tangent there, but yeah, let's go back to Utopia. So with Utopia, as we get this perfect state of ideals and free marketness and people enjoying a lot more and really for doing a lot less, we do have potential throwbacks of utopian lives, and we could become a little bit more, pardon me, a little bit more prone to being self-gratifying. And this is the point I always make, that this utopian society really cannot be this beautiful bliss, this thing of ultimate abundance, because we need the leveling thing of you've got to go to work, you've got to do something, you've got to achieve something, you've got to produce something of value for somebody else. And unless you do that, then really there is hardships that are going to be awaiting for you. There may be people that try and look after you and certain things like that, but really there has to be this counter dynamic which occurs in the utopian society for Utopia to exist, and therefore the free market capitalist state is probably the only ideal which it can continue within. And really, if you're going to try and go into this virtual reality world, there's still going to be some method and some way that you can have to go back into the real world to earn your keep. So we have this interesting balance. Maybe I'm going to throw this weird little theory out. Maybe you can go into virtual reality and master the real world, and then that can give some value back. That's an interesting point. But yeah, so this utopian society can exist. It is possible. There is potential ways that it can happen. We may be able to find a way that we can really limit the amount of pain. We can maximize the amount of pleasure. But if we give ourselves perpetual pleasure, then really it's not going to go too far. So Utopia just seems so easy. It seems too easy almost for it to happen. But yeah, just remember I think there has to be the bitterness of the apple when you bite into it. You may get the sugariness, but I think you do need to have the bitterness of the apple. There always needs to be this counteracting point of which you enjoy the fruits and then you feel too full that you cannot continue. If life was set up in a way that we could have this exponential pleasure, then I think we would just be reduced down to nothingness. So without pain, there is no gain. And therefore, I guess Utopia is really a fallacy in itself. It's probably a bit annoying that you got to this point in the end and I'm saying, no, it's all a fallacy, it's all in the mind. But really, we cannot create a perpetual state of heaven. It is impossible for it to happen. We have to reset, we have to get ourselves accustomed to certain levels of pleasure, and then we have to move on and achieve more and more so and more so. And really, that is the essence and the meaning of life itself. For us to get to that point and to really push ourselves on further and further and further. Again, that's another podcast I recommend you listening to as well, is The Meaning of Life, Why We Are Here. It really does interconnect us into those thoughts, and maybe we may get a bit more reasoning as to the terms and the meaning of life. Maybe we can tap into the altered states of nature. Who knows what potential things can happen once we have this ability of multi-processing minds which can continually crunch over a number of reasons and ideas and can store memory points so that they can continually roll over these ideas. It would be tremendous in the things that could be achieved. So I don't really want to still leave it here. I think there must be some kind of ideal of utopia. I think I'm going to just connect to dystopia as well. So I will make another podcast, obviously, of dystopia. And with the dystopia, obviously, these two go hand in hand, and really we get one side and the other side. And this is, when I mention these things as well, when I talk about utopia, I'm talking about a future state of ideals. Now, with a future state of ideals, we really have to think in terms of the accomplishment of ideals. Now, I don't think really, as I said in the first point, I don't think anything of real accomplishment of perpetual happiness can be achieved. We always need to attain a better place. And it's interesting how dystopia will just say that the world that we live in will become more oppressed, more downtrodden, worse. We get less technology, we get less happiness, we get less social ability, we get all of these things. But there is this intertanglement of both of those words. They both can happen within the split second of each other. And even though we could go down to this beautiful world of free market, voluntary exchanging of goods and everything else, there could be just one little twist on the corner that we didn't realize, and we're in a dystopia. So it's fairly interesting, and it's a really important thing to look at. I think also one of the interesting points to look at is, say if we was like looking in our parents' age at what we are now. So say let's go back 30 years, and they could look at the world that we're living in now. Are we living in more so of a utopia? Are we living in a freer state of being than compared to what they were living at? Now, we could say that we've got some fairly cool gadgets that we have ourselves with, but they may be a little bit perturbed by the way that we communicate with each other now, that we're a little bit obsessed with being stuck on this mobile device and really not talking or socializing as much as what we were. So this perspective and this view of ourselves and our future states and how our world has changed and how our world is changing is very important, and the thought experiment always must be really pushing ourselves into this realm of thinking. If we shut our eyes and really live in this world, and we just continuously live in this moment and never really have any forethought of what the world we are creating for our future is going to be like, then we really will not be able to master anything for humanity in the future. And as I will always put this one thing to everybody else, including myself, is that really the dystopia and the utopia which can be created all boils down to our own abilities and our own ways to master this world. And as I said, and as I put it, whereby the wise, the ones that study philosophy, the ones who are virtuous, they potentially will be the wisest. They make the correct investments. They're the prudent with the money. They're frugal. They choose to go into the right areas of study. They potentially inherit the land, and that's why it's so important that people should be looking upon themselves and not looking at everything else when it comes to the future state of the world that we live in. And then obviously we should be looking towards our children as well, and how we shape them to live in the future state of our world. And the way that we master and we control, not necessarily control, but we master our children to flourish is the dystopia or the utopia that we're going to create for ourselves in the future. So if we create beautiful, in terms of character, people which are highly virtuous, very disciplined, then we may be able to create the best. We may have the answer to humanity, and we may have the best way to flourish for the future of mankind. Well, not interesting, but this is really fundamental to everything that has been mentioned before in the past, and it really is overlooked so many times before. If we do not focus upon the way that we parent our children, and we focus on the way that we look after other people, then we will find ourselves in a state of dystopia. The way that we isolate ourselves from society, that we do not connect to anybody anymore, that we like to just be in our own little cell, playing our own little console, really is the future that we're going to have if you be that way. You are going to be your future. We are our repetition, and we are our role models to our children as well. And if we become, our children will try and look up to ourselves all the time, and they will try and become us, because we are the lessons of how to become successful, or at least successful in the way that we've reared them. So I've really span a little bit on this one in terms of us. I love putting it back on you guys. Really make you... a real good conspiracy theorist would say it's all of them. They're all trying to sort up the world, or they're going to create... These space aliens are going to give us this antidote to this toxin that we've been given in the water, and we're going to turn this world around. But it's really not the case. It's a lot worse. Okay, there, it's fine. So yeah, as always, I thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to go over Utopia. One day I do hope we can get to that beautiful field, that golden field, and we can shake hands and say we've done it. And we can rejoice, and we can boogie on down, and we can dance, and maybe we have to do it on a virtual reality level so that it's possible. But it would be a wondrous thing for us to have that. If it doesn't get achieved, then we're all doomed. No, then we're always going to have crack shots in the future. I don't even think, even if it gets to the worst of the worst point, people at some point are going to say, this world is crap. I really don't like this world anymore. So there's always other cracks and shots, but it just takes a long, long while. We're talking of potentially thousands of years before we can turn the ship around. Maybe there is certain circumstances with the powers and the technology that things can't get turned around, but I am an optimist for, I think, a good reasoned approach, because I believe I'm a good person, and I believe that goodness is in everyone else. It's a case of just unlocking it after a little bit of oppression. I guess some people may have just been totally cultured into a total shitstorm of a life that it's really hard to get them out of anything like that. But I do think everyone wants to live in a good world where people are good to them. So yeah, your future is in your hands. Our future is in your hands, and my hands, and everybody else's hands. So look after each other, and I will continue on with Dystopia. I should end with like a really positive note, shouldn't I, with going on to the next podcast with Dystopia, but let me, yeah, don't worry, you can listen to this second. Listen to Dystopia first, and then listen to me second. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. Sorry, I've been fluttering around a lot of ideas there. Really need to get a little bit more focus here on our ideas, but it's been a pleasure as always. If you have any knowledge or thoughts or any ideas or any counter arguments, or it's a bit awkward to do counter arguments against what I've just said, because this is all theory, but you can obviously say, okay, maybe your theory isn't quite right because this is this and this and this can happen. So yeah, actually you could do that. Just definitely give me comments back. I do love them. I will try and respond to as much as I can, and keep the conversation going. And I will be in touch with you in the future. Goodbye.